So I'm Dr. Joe Guse, and I've been living in New Zealand about 5 years. I was originally a psychologist in the Chicago area. And when I was just a student, long time ago, after 9/11 in America, it was an all-hands-on-deck situation. So that was my first experience working as a crisis counselor. So, you know, you think about people in New York, they were incredibly traumatized, but there were ripples far beyond that. It affected first responders, it affected people that had things like social phobias to begin with. It affected people that were of color and thought people were looking at them differently. So the ripples of 9/11 were really powerful. So one of the things I learned as a crisis counselor, just as a student back then, was these things have a much larger reach than we even fully consider sometimes. And I think for me personally, one of the ideas behind that was every person has a story of how this trauma affected them. You know, some people were in that building. Some people were in Christchurch, but even for people that were in Auckland or Kiwis living abroad, we all have our version of this story and how it affected us. So it's New Zealand's story, it's all of our story. So there have been a lot of people that have been affected by this story, and one of the other kinds of calls we got were people of color that were here, maybe not necessarily Muslims, but coming to New Zealand was their safe story. And now they've had to kind of revise that story. So I heard a lot of people from India, Pakistan, all over the world really, and they've had to revise, at least for now, their version of safety in New Zealand. One thing we heard a lot on the phone was people that had had a previous trauma. So whether it be a sexual assault or a lot of people that were in the earthquakes, that sort of thing, a new trauma like this can kind of rip that Band-Aid off. Because a lot of what post-traumatic stress is about is a sense of someone's safety in the world. And it comes along with hypervigilance, where you're kind of looking over your shoulder and you're kind of expecting bad things to happen. So after an incident like this, everyone's a little bit hypervigilant. Everyone's a little bit looking over their shoulder and on edge. It's just the byproduct of seeing something so violent on the news so many times. So a lot of our work as therapists is really helping those people that have been traumatized before regain that sense of safety. So one of the things we can do as psychologists and friends and caretakers is assure people that we are in a safe place, and this is a safe country. And I think as time passes, our nervous systems will start to process that a little more carefully. So being able to tell your story, just being able to have someone listen, and it's part of all of our healing process. So one thing that's going to be a challenge for all of us right now is managing the distress we're feeling. So a lot of times when people are feeling distressed, they could tend to avoid. They could tend to isolate themselves, which is not the right move because it makes us feel more anxious and more disconnected from other people. So there are some good ideas about how we manage distress. One, talking to other people. Being out and around other people is good for us, and talking and sharing stories, just physically being in the proximity of people is a safe feeling for people. But also, sometimes we need to direct our energy outwards. So those people that have come and volunteered and done something for someone else have gotten a real sense of like, I'm helping with this, I'm doing something to help with this problem. And so for some people that's a tremendous lift to be able to sort of think, I'm doing my little part to respond to this. So that's another thing we can do to manage our distress. One thing I would really recommend is take care of yourself. Make sure you're sleeping. If I'm up late and I'm watching the news and maybe I'm getting a few hours less of sleep, I would tend to feel more anxious and depressed because I haven't rested my machine properly. So one of the things we need to do is make sure we're feeding ourselves properly and sleeping properly and taking time out with our families and not just exposing ourselves to the news all the time, because distress can sneak up on us. You know, we have a couple hours less of sleep a day, and then it just kind of ripples into the rest of our day. There's a whole term called stress diathesis. So when someone has an underlying condition like anxiety or PTSD or depression, that thing can lie dormant until we throw too much stress at the problem. So this has been a stressful week for people. So when they're exposed to something like this that's so big, sometimes it can re-trigger old conditions. So taking care of ourselves is probably first and foremost right now. I think an important thing to remember when someone's going through something traumatic is your feelings can really vary a lot. You could be angry one day, you could be really sad, you could be really anxious and paranoid, so your feelings may be jumping around a little bit. One thing to remember is that's okay. You know, it's part of the process of healing, and it's not a straight line, it's not a straight curve. We're going to have days where we're kind of doing better and then we take a few steps back. That's part of the process. When it comes to painful experiences like that, sometimes things can be dormant for a long time, and then we hear a song or maybe some other piece of grief has kind of come up for someone because there's been so much death in the news. So we need to honor that, you know. It's okay for you to feel that. And I think a lot of people think, well, geez, who am I to be feeling sorry for myself? But each person is a case study of one here, you know, and I think that's really important to remember. If you're feeling that, pay attention. I think a really important thing to remember is sometimes we need a break from this story. Just like when we're watching a really scary movie and our nervous system is actually feeling real fear. It's just like that when we watch a really intense news story like this. We feel real fear. So one of the things we need to do to kind of counterbalance that is take a little break from the news. You know, I know we're all curious, and I know we all want to keep up with the story, but we've got to remember this is also imprinting on our nervous system. To just be exposed to the story itself is traumatic. So taking a break and realizing when you kind of are at this point where I think I've probably heard enough about violence today, it's very important to counterbalance that with a funny movie or time with your kids or laughing with your family and things like that, because there is an effect of seeing so much negative stuff on your nervous system. I think one of the things I've learned about Kiwis this week is they're resilient. So one of the things that I think that we're trending to is we're not going to allow ourselves to stay terrorized. A terrible thing happened, but this is still a beautiful, peaceful, resilient, kind country. Those are the stories that we need to be embracing right now. It's okay to have a laugh with your friends. It's okay to go outside and enjoy something like the beach. It's who we are, and it's part of our healing process. So by not allowing ourselves to be terrorized, we don't let this person that did this awful thing dominate the story and dominate our mental health and dominate our time with our families. That's not how the story is supposed to end. It's supposed to end with us getting back to who we are. One of the things we've kind of learned about people when they respond to stress is our body responds by sending this stuff called cortisol and adrenaline through our body. So it's an alert signal that, hey, something's going on here, you need a little more energy. So first responders, athletes, someone getting ready for a big game, anything, they would have this energy in their system. I would say everyone in New Zealand probably has a little extra adrenaline and cortisol in their system right now, just from having watched the news and been a part of the story. So the first thing we need to do is kind of calm this other part of our nervous system down, which is more of a brake pedal. So we do that by sleeping, by breathing and exercising, by relaxing, because we're not meant to kind of be at that heightened level of arousal all the time. So for right now, the first response, that fight or flight thing, is that sense of like hypervigilance. I need to be on guard. I need to be ready for something bad to happen. But as we start to regain our sense of safety in the world, we need to calm that down a little bit, and we need to kind of internally feel more safe. So now that we know that the immediate threat in the environment isn't so important, we need to be understanding how we're talking to ourselves. You know, if I'm driving in traffic like, oh, that looks suspicious, or something isn't right there, or I don't like the way that guy looks at the airport, we need to be really aware of how we're talking to ourselves. Because that can really manifest in kind of an all-day experience of arousal, which is not healthy for anyone. No one's meant to live with that level of anxiety all day, and I think a lot of people have been going through that. One thing I like to talk about with people that are experiencing distress, anxiety, depression is think about it like the check engine light in your car, okay? So sometimes that light comes on and we think, well, you know, maybe that's nothing. Maybe I'll keep driving. I've had a lot of cars like that in my life, but we need to pay attention to that check engine light. And that might look like someone not getting enough sleep, someone being a little more irritable at work, someone probably not listening as attentively to their children. So the check engine light as it relates to mental health is just paying attention to that. If someone's kind of told us you don't seem quite yourself, pay attention to that, because that's kind of the slippery slope of getting into something that needs help. So there are a lot of services available. You know, we have our phone line 1737. You can call, you can text. We can make arrangements for one-on-one sessions. But if you feel like you're at that point where you need help, please do. It's important.